I'm teasing, Mrs. Van.
She just wants more cake.
I didn't say it. Don't look at me. I start a lot of things. All right. We're in Samuel. 1 Samuel, to be exact. Still in chapter 14. All right. We're going to get a little bit of background information, and then we'll get to the section I want to focus in on. And I recognize the only thing standing between me and you and a bowl full of ice cream is me. So we're going to collect an offering. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Get to the point. Previously on Sunday night, we talked about last week how Jonathan routed an entire garrison, probably 30 or 40 men, and begins to set the Philistine army to flight with one iron sword and his armor bearer, which is the equivalent of maybe a squire in these days, or not these days, but in the feudal days. And so we kind of come into the end of this. The men from that had hidden in the hills come out of the hills. Saul, from his position, sees this great calamity that is happening within the Philistine camp. And so he and his men, seeing an opportunity to rout an enemy that is in utter chaos, pounces. He jumps, and that's what's going to happen between 16 and 24. I'm not making this up. It's there. Go read. We're just not going to read it for time's sake. 24 is where we want to focus. The men of Israel had become hard-pressed that day. So Saul said, or laid an oath on the people, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. And now when the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And the people entered the forest, behold, honey was dropping. But no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father's charge, and the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of his staff that was in his hand, and dipped the honey and put it to his mouth. And his eyes became bright, kind of like me after that chocolate cake. Then one of the people said, "Your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food this day.' And all the people were faint. And Jonathan said, 'My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little honey. How much better is if people had eaten freely today and the spoil of their enemy that they found. For now, the defeat amongst the Philistines has not been great.'" We'll jump down and look at a little more. Yes? 14:24. She never listens to me.
No, I had it marked in my Bible and I forgot my Bible, so I thought you were in a different place. That's okay, Stephanie, I didn't hear you neither. Now we get it. Okay, thank you. Go back.
Chapter 14, verse 24.
The answer is yes, dear.
My address is the address of trouble. Anyhow, let's get this train back on because there's ice cream. They are beating the tar out of the Philistines. They are winning at a great pace. And your commander of the army, when he sees his men becoming faint or hard-pressed, decides, "I've got a brilliant battle plan. I'm not going to let them eat." And not only am I not going to let them eat, I'm going to make an oath binding them all to agree. Because I'm and it's great to be the king. Why? Now look at how this vow was made. Why the vow was made. "Cursed be the man who eats food until this evening, and I am" what? "Avenged of my enemies." There's a pride aspect here with Saul. First of all, he's been won up by his son and his armor bearer. Saul is cringing. Saul has already made a fatal mistake by offering a sacrifice that he was compelled to do because Samuel did not arrive when Samuel said he was going to arrive. So Saul was forced to do it. His army is fleeing in great droves. The Philistines are on the other side. They outmatched him. They're moving around the countryside freely, basically tearing up things. And his son, an armor bearer, puts a garrison to flight. God causes an earthquake. Saul's pride is injured. Saul then says, I know what, I'll make a rash vow. Now, here's the thing. Rash vows seem to be all the rage during the period of the Judges. There's another individual that makes a rash vow. His name is Jephthah. And there's a huge debate on whether or not Jephthah actually ends up murdering his daughter or not. And the problem is the Hebrew is inconclusive because the word that we translate in the text that whatever comes out of the tent to greet me on the way back actually can be translated whoever comes out of the tent to meet me on the way back. Now, Jephthah could have been thinking about his annoying mother-in-law. I know many... No, I'm kidding. She'll forget after the ice cream. She doesn't even remember what chapter we're in. I have a huge living room, so I'm okay. Jephthah could have been thinking about his mother-in-law. He could have been thinking about his annoying other person that lived in the house, not his daughter. But yet, that's what comes out. And if you read the text and the understanding of the text, if he was thinking about a whatever, when a whoever came out, it wouldn't have crossed his mind. And so your text does not help you. And there's a huge debate over this in theological circles. I take the fact he kills his daughter because he is not necessarily a great and holy man. He's a worthless man trying to obtain something. Here's Saul trying to obtain God's favor by offering up this vow that he does not need to offer. Here's the thing about it. He doesn't have to make this vow. They are winning. They are stomping these dudes in the ground. And then he does something that is absolutely prohibitive to the production of the end goal. I don't want anybody to eat. And that would also, in many cases, include drink until the end of the day. I don't know when the last time you were in mortal combat with another person slinging around a sword, but it usually is pretty taxing after the first two dudes you hit. And so one army is in flight and the other army is trying to get pursuit and is doing so with no food. But it gets worse. Just as in the case with Jephthah, who eats? Jonathan. So now the king is in a quandary, is he not? Jonathan comes in, sees the honey. Now I'd like to see honey dripping from everywhere on a tree. I mean, it looks kind of like a sticky mess, like one of those little Spartan runs. I've never understood the concept of a Spartan run, not just from the fact that I hate running, but I have never understood the fact of running just so I could get absolutely filthy. I've never understood how those two go hand in hand together. I ran in the Army because it was a job requirement. Yeah. It was awesome. I was covered in mud from head to toe. Oh, really? That's great. I bet you go out and get drunk and puke on the next day and think it's great too. Anyhow, we digress. And so they enter a forest. They're chasing these folks. They could have plundered much. Jonathan appears with his men. They eat, are now automatically identified as those who have eaten something they shouldn't have. Jonathan looks, and so what does he say about his dad? Verse 29. My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little bit of honey. Now, there's nothing like magical about the honey. It's not like full of steroids. But if you take something sugary after expending yourself all day, do you not get a little boost? Right? It's kind of like Dr. Pepper, right? 10, 2, and 4. Right? Or the old Coca-Colas. You know, the old Coca-Colas. Medicinal and refreshing. Built-in opiates. Yay! They take and they eat, and his eyes brighten, and he goes, look, if we'd have stopped for about 5 minutes, gorged on this honey, had some water, we could have routed these guys. The destruction would have been so great. And the implication is they would never have come back. We would have so throttled these people that this is the second time they've come up for battle, and the second time we've whooped them. But because of a foolish vow. We give our word so quickly and easily. Have you ever noticed nowadays, at one time, a man's word was his bond, was it not? If he said, I'm going to do it, and shook your hand, that was done. I've told this story. It's not B.H. Carroll. It's, he was the pastor at First Baptist before Criswell. I forget. Anyhow, it'll come to me. Truett. George W. Truett. Thank you, brother. George W. Truett. In the 1920s, the Southern Baptists did a huge campaign drive for funds. Problem was, during the Depression, people moved and those tithes weren't being brought in and the money was not being given up to the association, and they built based upon those projections. And they found themselves millions in the Depression in great debt. George W. Truett refinanced all the debt the Southern Baptists had. You want to use for collateral? His good name. How many of you can go to your bank right now and refinance all your debt and go, trust me, I'm good for it? Yeah, they have the same response when I do that to them. They just start giggling. I haven't quite figured that one out. Why is that the case? That is the case because, and a lot of times in our culture today, while many of us in this room, when we say we'll do something and we mean it, we follow it through and we take care of it, so many others have promised things and not done it. You look at football contracts these days and what these guys promise to do, and then they get an owie and sit out for a couple weeks. Because the oaths become worthless. Saul's oath, one, is worthless. He makes a worthless and rash vow. He puts his army at great jeopardy. Had the Philistines stopped and turned, had it not been God pushing them away and defeating them for the Israelites, because the text will tell you that the Philistine sword turned one against the other. Had God not been doing that, and that army reformed and rallied, they would have slaughtered every one of those Israelites in due order, because they aren't under an obligation not to eat anything. And here's Saul in his pride and his self-centeredness making a vow. See, he was Saul one time. He was the king we wanted him to be. Every man in Israel that doesn't come to my aid, I'm going to rip them in half like the ox I just did. And everybody loved it. Now he does kind of the same thing, but he does it in a foolish way. Puts his army at risk, and now has jeopardized his son because his son did not hear the oath. His son comes into it kind of afterwards. Jephthah gives us the exact same warning, a rash vow. God looks at, here's the thing about vows, folks. Here's the thing about oaths. Ecclesiastes, I believe it's chapter 5, says, do not be quick in making a vow, for God does not delight in the words of fools. Pay what you owe God. See, when you make a vow, you are calling God as witness to your statement. And He doesn't take that lightly. And so what Saul has done here has really bound himself and can quite possibly cost him his son. Let's look down. 38. Basically, the people come, the battle's over because they're exhausted. They've had a good slaughter. They could have had a great slaughter. They've fallen on the train. They've plundered the goods. I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version of here. Kind of like our CPR training yesterday, where the guy just like, this is the most important part you'll ever know. You don't need that. Click. You've already got that. The only downside about the CPR training yesterday was we found out that we couldn't shock you people with the defibrillators. And I know, I was so disheartened. Some of you people got a break that were sleeping. I'm teasing. They draw up. Saul wants to know why God hasn't answered him on whether or not he should go and continue to press the fight with the Philistines. And so he then begins to cast lots. And he says, okay, you everybody over there and me and Jonathan over here to see who's at fault. You people or my family. And the lot lands on Jonathan. That's the Cliff Notes of it. Okay? So drop down to 43. Then Saul says to Jonathan, tell me what you've done. Jonathan said, I tasted a little honey with the tip of my staff, which was in my hand. I am here, and I will die. Jonathan at least is willing, just like Jephthah's daughter, to be submitted to the foolish and rashness of the vow. I wouldn't fly today at all, right? Your kids look at you like you had lost your mind. Oh, I ain't doing that. So God said, and so Saul said, God, do so to me and more. You shall surely die, Jonathan. That's the king's decree. Jonathan's going to die. Now, Saul could have simply said, well, you didn't hear the vow. You were not here when the vow was proclaimed. Therefore, you are not at fault for this vow that I spoke, that I had bound all of Israel to, because you were not in the presence of it being declared. And when you were informed that the vow had been made, you stopped. Therefore, no vow was broken. Because there has to be an intent behind the breaking of something, right? For something to be a real lie, there's got to be an intent of deception there, right? And so Saul could have simply said, well, you did not know. When you were informed, you stopped. No harm, no foul. But what's at stake here with Saul? His pride. I made a decree. I made a decree. And not even my son is above me. What had happened earlier that could put him in this position? Oh, wait, yeah, Jonathan and one other dude routs a garrison and puts an army to flight. Saul is cowering in his camp, watching his numbers dwindle. Saul's irrationalness, almost made a new word there. Call Webster's. I use it 3 times. It's a word. Saul's being irrational is going to cost him his son, a mighty man of battle. But notice what happens. The people get involved, the men that he called as witnesses, and notice what they said. Then the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation for Israel? Basically, you're going to kill the guy that has delivered Israel. That's what I hear you saying. You're going to kill the individual. Let's say he's not your son. Let's throw that away. You're going to kill the man that just saved your butt. Here's your sign. Have you been eating lead chips? Been out in the sun a little long? Maybe you should have a taste of honey. Your idea in your pride and in your conceit is, I must fulfill this vow, even though no violation of the vow actually exists. The people see that no violation of the vow actually exist. The people see the absolute irrationalness of Saul. Saul. Problem with preaching Paul in the morning and Saul in the evening time. Sometimes you mix those names up. Makes for a very lively sermon. Notice what they say. Jonathan shall not die. As the Lord lives, there shall not be one hair of his head to touch the ground. Ever wonder where that "don't you touch a hair on their head" comes from? Put a lot of colloquialisms we use that come straight out of the text. Go the extra mile. Anyhow. Not even one hair on your head, for he has worked with God this day. They recognize he had faith to go up against the garrison. Here's Saul going, "Lord, give me a sign. Give me a sign. Why are we in this place?" And Jonathan, remember, sneaks out, goes through the rocks, says, "Okay, here's the battle plan. When we pop out from behind the rocks and go, 'Here we are,' if they say, 'Stay there,' we're dead. But that's okay. But if they say, 'Come up,' we're going to clean house." And that's what he did. And then after seizing the opportunity and killing 20 dudes in a span of a half an acre, and if you haven't ever seen people split open in a half an acre, it's pretty nasty. Gives chase. 2 dudes giving chase. It's like a Chihuahua chasing a Great Dane. Hey, really, think about it. It's a Chihuahua chasing a Great Dane. That should never happen. 2 dudes, and only one of them is adequately armed. Chasing, and the army they're running towards goes, "I don't know who those 2 guys are, but apparently they're really bad, and I don't want any more of this." And oh, by the way, the Jews that were with the Philistines that went out and fought with them now have turned on the Philistines. And so there's this massive rout going on everywhere, all caused by a boy, or not a boy, but a young man that said, "If they tell us to come up, we're going to kill them all." Saul's over there wringing his hands. "Should I go? Should I not go? So give me a sign. Give me a sign." You mean like the rout that's already started? You mean like the earthquake I gave you? You mean like the Jews that were fighting with the Philistines that have now turned against them? You mean like your son and his... You mean like any of those signs? Pick one, Saul. Move out and draw fire. But now Saul's trying to figure out how to kill his kid. All because his pride gets in the way. No, because he makes a foolish statement and cannot and will not back it up. As king, he could have simply said, "My boy did not hear my command. He was not here." There is no violation of this command. There is no violation of the law. And the minute once he was informed that it was a violation, he stopped. None. Now, this is where you get into the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And Saul took a very draconian view of that law. You see why Saul will not last long upon the throne. There's a lot more details in that passage. We've jumped over to the highlights of this passage to note several things. First of all, be careful what we say. In our pride or in our depths of despair, we make promises to God in the darkness that we have no intention of ever keeping. And those promises, God intends you to keep. Well, I didn't mean it. Well, I'm sorry. The next time you tell God, "If you get me out of this, I swear I'll be a missionary to the Congo," you better learn how to speak Congolese. Because if he gets you out of it, you're bound to it. "Well, we live under grace." Oh, isn't that cute? That kind of applies to everything, including you being a liar, doesn't it? Oh, no. Oh. It's kind of like the young boy that says, "I promised God, if he gets me out of this situation in combat, I promised I'd be a priest." Really? How's your going? "Oh, I didn't become a priest." Huh. So God is Santa Claus to you. It's because it represents a high or low view of God. A high view of God says that when I make this promise to the Lord, I intend to keep it. A low view of God says, He understands I plan to break this. Did you hear that? He understands, I plan to break this. This is why now we have contracts instead of handshakes. This is why now the bankers laugh at you when you go, look, trust me, I'm good for it. Because I damaged the microphone. This is why when people say, when you do business, and many of you have phone books and you see the little ichthus on the thing, are you swayed to go with that guy now? No, because even within the church we have individuals that put all that stuff on their business cards and then they'll lie, cheat, and steal left and right because their word has no meaning and has no purpose. Saul's words has no meaning and no purpose. The people basically looked at Saul and said, this ain't happening. This ain't happening in any way today because you've decided to be foolish. We are not going to kill a man who worked with God and brought this victory. You can go pack sand. Our words have meanings, our words have value, our words have importance. Our promises have meanings, our promises have value, and they have importance. And it's important that when we say we're going to do something, we honor it. Why? Because we're not just an agreement between us and them. There's a third person that we have called in silently when we do this. It is us, him, and them. And he sees. And so you have here a foolish statement. This is why I believe Jephthah actually kills his daughter, because Jephthah believes that the vow has to be fulfilled. Even though it goes against the direct prohibition that God says. You don't commit child sacrifice, period. Jephthah follows through with it. And there's this big debate on whether or not God would require it or not. We're not going to chase that rabbit because there's ice cream. And I have spent weeks discussing this with guys at other places. Have you ever made a promise and ended up having to eat your own words on those promises? Saul does. Saul commands several times that the boy will die, and the people look at Saul and say, no. There was no purpose for this vow to be made. The children of Israel were winning and carrying the day, a little sustenance, and they would have routed in such a great victory. And yet Jonathan even declares it. Their victory would have been greater than it is now because the momentum was blunted. How many times we use our words to blunt the momentum of God? And it's not to say anything that there's a problem with folks. The thing is, it's something to think about. How many times have we been driving down the road and go, oh Lord, if you get me out of this mess, you get really bad. If you get me out of this, I promise. And we start going down the things we promise we're going to give up, and then when we get out of it, I'm not giving that up. Saul makes a rash vow. Saul makes a rash vow and it costs him a great victory. Saul makes a rash vow and it almost cost him the life of his son. Had the people not intervened, he would have killed that boy. The one individual that took the initiative and carried the day and worked with God. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to come before you and to look at the impact of our words and our concepts, and even myself, Lord. At times I've made promises to folks that I have not kept, sometimes with the best of intentions, and sometimes knowing I had no intention of keeping them. Holy Father, the damage that it not only does to my reputation, but your reputation, and to the church's reputation, and to the people's reputation. For the times we make foolish promises, unnecessary promises, that cost us greatly because in so doing we are blunting your work. I ask you to be with each and every one of us here. I ask, Heavenly Father, that as we leave here this evening and go over and enjoy some ice cream and fellowship, that you'll bless the ice cream to the nourishment of our body, and at least the absence of calories. We ask, Heavenly Father, for your blessing upon us. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, we're not going